think is the final lecture on Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. In the last lecture recording, we covered chapter 4, which walked through Weber's sort of parsing of the different ascetic Protestantisms. That is, the versions of Protestant Christianity that drove believers into a calling in the world, so that in Weber's terms, everyday life was approached with the seriousness that a monk would have approached life within the convent. Everyday life was sort of fraught with moral and honestly, just that the fate of your soul depended upon your conduct in everyday life. And then as Weber says, it drove people into a kind of systematic way of life without relief, right? There was no moment when the believer could get free of the demand to work hard and to be frugal in one's savings. So today we're going to cover the last chapter of the book, which is called Asceticism and the Spirit of Capitalism. So this is sort of the culmination of the argument, in which he looks at the writings primarily of Richard Baxter, technically a Presbyterian minister in Kidderminster, near Birmingham or Manchester, I think Birmingham, England, and who Weber notes is one of the most successful ministers in all of history. That he walked into a kind of debauched congregation of working class people who didn't work very hard and liked to drink and party and lived the life of merry old England. And within a few short years, really no more than 20 years, he transformed the town into kind of a hotbed of industrial development of capitalism. And the reason it happened was because his ministry was so successful that Baxter actually took these people who had a traditional economic ethic, who worked to live, and who didn't try to maximize income, who had all kinds of values, but also all kinds of debaucheries and so on. And he actually transformed his congregation, his flock, into people who were exemplars of the Protestant ethic. So we need to kind of walk our way through this sort of amazing chapter. Again, Baxter isn't well known in America, and the success that he had is important. As he says, in many ways, this is one of the first great proletariat populations, and it was one of the most rapid and total conquering of the spirit of traditionalism by the spirit of Protestant of ascetic Protestantism that then directly fed into the spirit of capitalism. So it's very, very important as we go. I think I'm going to do so I've already shown you what I think that the essence of the book is, in sort of this goofy little image, is that in Weber's work, what ascetic Protestantism did, especially and maybe primarily in its Calvinist forms, right, in the form of Protestantism taught by John Calvin, God essentially turned, the Christian God essentially left the world, or even if you want to go farther back, Yahweh, the creator God of Judaism, left the world, and became a supramundane God, a God that has absconded, Deus absconditus, right? And left behind simply a set of laws or commands to follow, a name, Yahweh itself, right, the Tetragrammaton, and left behind a set of rules that one must live by, right, the 10 Commandments, and then the 600 plus additional commands that were left to Moses and recorded in Leviticus and Numbers and elsewhere, right? So there were tremendous rules left behind, but then God is gone. And that meant that all of the sort of Christian parishes that existed throughout Western Christendom, that cared for, that pastored to working people and business people, right? And that depended upon that kind of cycle of sin and redemption, where the believers must work through the church in order to become to become saved, right? That the church had a monopoly on salvation, a monopoly on the magic of salvation, a monopoly on the sacred, and that the believer, if the believer was to achieve protection on this earth and salvation in the next world, right, had to work within the confines of the church. A church of a mundane God, right? A mundane God that was there, that was present, that could be appealed to with prayer, that could be cajoled or controlled a little bit with sacrifice, right? That if you made a sacrifice, you could get something back. So a God that's present in the world, and a living God that could be approached. And again, what Judaism did first, and then what Calvinist Protestantism did second, was redefine God as a God with his back to creation, and who wasn't available. And so the big idea is that all sacrifice must stop, all magic must stop, right? And that God is essentially gone. And what you must do, as the emissary prophet said, right? Follow the law. Stop sacrificing, stop praying, stop magical incantations and so on. Just follow the bloody law, right? And so ritual correctness then, ritual purity became the kind of focus of Judaism, and then later on becomes the focus of Calvinist Christianity. What's really important in Calvin, as we talked about last time, is that the ritual correctness and the need to stay ritually pure didn't ever stop for the Puritan. And everyday life became the location and the time in which one proved that one was saved by avoiding sin and by working very hard and living very frugally, right? And so everyday life became the space in which one proved salvation by following the law, and that then transformed the believers into wealthy capitalists, quite honestly, or people who were virtuoso capitalists. And so, as Weber says, in other religious systems, even medieval Catholicism, being rich may have been acceptable. Being greedy probably wasn't. Having avarice was definitely a sin. But being wealthy probably wasn't much of a barrier. Even in Lutheranism, it wasn't much of a barrier to being rich. But it was kind of morally neutral or ambivalent. And in Calvinism, being wealthy became an actual sign, a sign of salvation, right? So high profit and high wealth was an index of the state of one's soul, right? And a sign that one was saved, right? So the wealthy were saved, the damned were probably poor. Okay, so that's where this is going to go. So why don't I just jump rather than try to get here? So I tried to create one image that sort of depicted Weber's argument, not only in the book Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, but also in other books like Ancient Judaism that I've been reworking again. So what Weber in the book Ancient Judaism, Weber argues that the Jewish people generated the first great religion of a transcendent God, and a religion based upon following law instead of sacrificing, right? And so, and what Weber argues in Ancient Judaism, backed up throughout the Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, is the idea that Calvinism negated magic or eliminated magic. It was hostile to magic in every way, and hostile to the idea of sacrifice or sacraments, right? Any mundane appearance of the sacred was counter to Calvin's faith system. So to be a Calvinist is to be someone who loses all faith that God is present in the world. If one experiences something like a spiritual possession, Luther's mystical union, a kind of mystical experience, it almost certainly is not God. It's a demon, and it's not a sign that things are good. It's a sign that things are very bad. So a kind of cold, calculating reduction, right, of life itself and of the world around into a profane means to achieve an end. So I don't have time to go into this completely. Weber mentions the sort of rationalist philosophy of Christian Wolff, a sort of post-pietist, post-Calvinist a philosopher, associated with the sort of with the German Enlightenment, and that Wolff Wolf really was crucial for identifying, the elimination of magic and the reduction of the world to mean, so that one could, again, kind of turn the world into a thing that can be fussed with in a profane manner. So really fast, the world in every religious tradition, probably prior to Calvinism, the world was linked to the sacred, so that there were things in the world that had spiritual significance. So what I tried to do here is create two worlds, right? The duplex world, dualism, where you have the world of creation, of senses, of everyday life, the wide awake world of everyday life down here. And then with kind of wispy, thin little spiritual ties, we have a separate spiritual world up here, right? So body and soul, society and God, the world of everyday cause and effect relation, common sense, and up here you've got the world of magical interrelations and manipulation. And that all sacred systems everywhere set something in the world apart as kind of a place of incredibly concentrated religious significance, right? So again, at medieval Christianity, the church, the God, that God most clearly appeared in the world in the form of the Eucharist, right, in the form of the wafer-thin piece of bread, and that the church then became a kind of fortified storehouse for God, a place from which God emanated out, that the sacred emanated out. Even in Judaism, God was never completely eliminated, and that, the temple in Jerusalem, the Ark of the Covenant, the place where God was stored and where sacredness was sort of incredibly dense, right? Sort of almost like a nuclear core in a reactor. So the sacred in every religious system everywhere, at least that would be Weber's claim, was stored in a kind of concentrated form. And that thing then, where the sacred is stored, is set apart because it too becomes sacred. The priest who manipulates the sacred is set apart. And then the believers try to become sacred by approaching the thing set apart with sacrifice, taking something, burning it to set it apart, and prayer and other things, right? And so there's an immanent God that can be approached and dealt with, and that one, again, kind of magically appeals to. So in every other religious tradition, something in the world is set apart. And again, and what the Calvinist God does is completely drain the world of sacredness. So there is nothing sacred in the world. Other people aren't sacred. They're not children of God. Most of them are children of the devil. Society itself isn't sacred. It needs to be rationally reconstructed because it's part of fallen creation, right? The nature itself is not sacred. It is a thing to be used and redeployed. Animals aren't sacred. They're to be used and redeployed, so on. So what I have here is the figure of death, but let's just say this is the Calvinist Yahweh with a sigh, who's going to, just in the same way that a sigh in the medieval world. Yeah. So here's a picture of Nebuchadnezzar's image from the Old Testament, right? So you have an icon. Almost all religions prior to Judaism, and alongside of Judaism, there's an icon somewhere, something that represents the God, that's a kind of portal between the everyday world of cause and effect and the world of the sacred, and that place of, again, dense sacredness, then people bow down and worship and so on, right? So there is something in the world set apart. Sacredness is in the world. It manifests itself in the world. What Yahweh commands, especially Moses, Isaiah, and elsewhere, is that one. This is the king Asa. I think from Chronicles is where this is. But at any rate, where the icon is killed, right? So what Yahweh tells the believer, I, Yahweh, do not appear before you, or if I do, I'm only a burning bush or something. You might hear my voice. You might get the call right here, but you're never going to see me. And I command that you destroy all other gods, right? The first commandment. And the second one, thou shalt not make a graven image unto me. So this is the destruction. Yahweh commands that other gods are destroyed or killed. And that's what I'm trying to depict here in this image. So all forces in the world that are sacred are to be destroyed and eliminated. So in the here's an image of a scythe, a medieval image of a scythe being used for harvest. So the scythe basically cuts down the grain. The grain is at the top of the stalk. The bottom of the stalk is where the scythe cuts. You can get forage or something out of the stalks after the grain is removed. But there you go, right? The scythe is the weapon that eliminates the seed. And if the seed, let's say the seed is the soul of the grass, and here you are cutting the soul away, letting the soul go. Well, we know that that in medieval Christianity, death was often depicted. This is from Peter Bruegel's great painting on the triumph of death, and I think you can see here. Yeah, death is depicted as the grim reaper. Death has a scythe and goes down, and just like the farmer there was mowing down blades of grass with the scythe, death is mowing down human beings. All flesh is as grass, as the good book says, right? And so is mowing down people. And here it is. Here's death again, riding a sort of skinny horse, killing people as well, right? So mowing people down, cutting off people, right? And so, so death is depicted often as a figure with a scythe. Here is a picture of iconoclasm from the Protestant Reformation, the Calvinist Reformation in Holland, and famous painting. So what you're seeing here are Calvinists who are using they're using force to take icons out of the world, right? To remove them from the church. These graven images of God, of popes, of magical beings like angels and so on, and they're being destroyed. So that you destroy the gods, right? So in the same way that Yahweh commanded that all other gods, all icons, all graven images, all golden calves, and so on be destroyed, the Calvinist God commanded the followers of Calvin to destroy all of the icons, the representations of Christ. So like, burning of crosses and that kind of stuff, right? And burning of crucifixes, getting rid of the graven images of God, of Christ, of the saints, and so on. So here you see all of these, icons being carried away. Here's the baby Jesus being carried away and about to be burned. Here's again, a kind of, so here's the fire where the crucifix itself is being thrown on. So this is really important, and I really want this to come across. The Calvinist God commanded the death of all other gods, all sacred things. So even Christ, Christian followers, Christian believers in the Christian church itself was corrupt to Calvin, and therefore the images of Christ are idolatry. Those who believe in the non-Calvinist churches are idolaters and deserve no mercy, right? And so again, even the images of Christ are being burned and destroyed. So this is called iconoclasm, right? The hatred and destruction of icons, of representations of the sacred, and this is what Calvin's God commanded, or at least what the followers of Calvin believed that the God commanded. So what does it mean? So the inside of a Calvinist church, I think I showed you. I've got my image here if I can find it. Yeah. So the inside of a Calvinist church, very famously devoid of any icons, right? So in David Hackett Fisher's book, Albion Seed, where he looks at different folkways systems in America, the Puritans and the Quakers both had churches completely devoid of icons and images, right? And in this, again, this one Puritan church that Fisher represents, the only image in the entire church is that. It's the eye of God looking at you, right? So you're seen and known that you're seen. But otherwise, any beautiful image is gone. Puritans were famous. They were even comments on it in the footnotes to the Protestant Ethic, how bad the singing was in American churches, except for, as he says, black churches in the South, or anyone that sort of, or any church that hired black singers. That there the music was beautiful, but the rest of it, he said, grated upon the German ear because it was so ugly. And there was intentionally bad singing and unlovely music among Puritans and in at least some of the pious groups, right? So you didn't want an icon, you didn't want an image of God in a Puritan or a Calvinist church. Okay, so what that means is then the world itself becomes devoid of the sacred. The sacred is gone, okay? And so that's what the Calvinist God does. And this is what Weber thinks is absolutely essential, okay? What Calvin did is destroyed magic, all magic in the world. And what magic did, if you remember, magic was the force that held society in tradition. So it's it's all of the magic forces, all of these sacred forces, demons, devils, vengeance, attacks, and so on. That if you alter the world in some way, if you undo tradition, if you change the way we do things, right? If you change it, you're going to get attacked. Bad things are going to happen. So xenophobia, the fear of the strange, of the different, is crucially linked here to magic. So what Calvinism does is it completely severs the world of spirit from the profane world of everyday life. God is gone, right? And so all of the sacred things in the world are gone. No more immanent sacred and magic. Instead, all of those things float away and are absorbed into the transcendent, otherworldly Spirit of God, right? The supramundane God is now the possessor of all sacredness. And Okay, so there is no mundane sacred. The mundane world, the world itself, right, is literally forsaken of God. Therefore, you, the believer, following the law, are working towards the greater glory of God by making profit out of the world, by turning cattle into tallow, and by making tallow out of cattle and money out of men, right? That you're able to transform human beings into profit, the world itself into profit. Most human beings are not heaven-bound anyway. They are not the children of God. They're not holy. They're not set apart in any way. They can be used like a goat, right, for your own ends. And so there it is. So all of the sacredness is cut. So just the sigh goes through and severs it, leaving behind a profane, touchable, mundane world. So this is what Weber calls in other essays the disenchanted world. It's especially in the From Max Weber collection, the disenchanted world, right? The world that has lost all of its enchantment, all of the magic spirits and forces are gone. That means that the world itself is no longer full of ends. The ends are ended, and that means the world is now a means to achieve ends, right? So the world is not sacred. It's been demoted from something that is full of values that people have died for and are willing to die for to protect, and now it all gets devalued, and so that the world becomes a mean to achieve, as we're going to find out, value, profit, right? The end of value, profit. So the entire world now becomes a mean. So you can completely and that's what So remember rationalization. Again, this is kind of a wolf notion, but that you can rationalize everything. It means that you have an unconstrained selection of means to achieve an end. If you completely eliminate the sacred from everyday life, that means everything in the world is now able to be selected from as one is seeking ends of value. There's nothing one need organize around. All of time, all of creation itself is available openly, freely, for the capitalist, the saint, to exploit, right? So it is the radical devaluation of the world to mere means to achieve the end, right? And of course, we know that in the end, the ultimate goal was to prove salvation, and the way that the Puritan proved salvation was by achieving success in their calling, which worked for the greater glory of God, right? To expand the glory of God. That, measured by profit, measured by success in your calling, was an indicator then of the state of your soul And because you were successful in expanding the greater glory of God, you may well be one of the saints. It was a way to still that inner voice of uncertainty about whether one was saved or damned. Okay? So that's it. So Weber's Calvinist God, it's a God that kills off all other gods and then leaves. Okay? So that the Calvinist God, after it kills off everything else, right? So these are all gone, it then turns its back on creation and goes away. So you can't pray, you can't sacrifice, you can't contemplate and wonder about God, right? And you can't appeal to God. God is gone. So even in a more complete sense than the Old Testament God Yahweh, right? The God of the Calvinists is gone. So let's just look very briefly here at ancient Judaism. So, Weber writes quite a bit about the prophets and prophecy. So there's also quite a bit in here about sacrifice and magic. But, on the section on magic and ethics and eschatology of Yahwehism, it's followed up by sections on the social psychology of the prophets, which is just amazing writing. But Weber basically argues that, listen, that magic, was opposed by Yahweh. That one basically is no longer living in the world of magical rites, but instead of law following. So even in Leviticus, where you still have magic rituals outlined, or some sacred rituals outlined to feed and tend and care for Yahweh, most of them, you have grain offerings, you have burnt offerings of animals, piacular rites that you can get sort of your sins forgiven if you do that. There's about 7 annual feasts of commemoration. It talks about priests and what priests are doing, and then it hits the crucial things, that the main thing that keeps a priest in Judaism in the position of a priest, even then, was staying pure. That one, in order to be able to touch the holy, the set apart, the sacred, one had to remain pure. And so much of the rituals were really all about, purity. A lot of the commandments were about purity. The entire sections dealing with things like, sexual purity and food purity and so on. Yeah, so there's all kinds of things. Day of Atonement, yeah. But in the end, the laws of rituals and so on. So there it is. But by the time, you get to the end of Moses' days, right? Moses basically says, look, Deuteronomy, I'm going to give you a second law, but the second law is essentially underlining the first one. And what Judaism does, crucially, is create a kind of eternal system of laws, right? Laws that don't really change, laws that were given by God through God's messengers, right? And then any prophet after Moses basically keeps saying the same thing. You already know the law, return to the law. So this is what Weber argues, is that whatever the social psychology of the individual prophets were, they all had the same message. Stop sinning and obey the already revealed law. There is nothing new under the sun. There are no new laws. Just follow them and obey them. And so all this stuff in here about how the individual believer is called, we're called as a people called. God doesn't appear as an image, but God will speak and you can hear. The calling was really important. Each of the prophets were called and had a calling, literally a calling. Yeah. Moses tells the followers to listen to and obey God's call. Choose life, long life, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 to 20. Listen to God, listen to the call. Do not sin, listen to the call. Do not really sacrifice, just listen to the call. And so in Judaism then, the emissary prophets delivered that message consistently. You already know what you must do. You already have the law. You already know the commandments. Follow them, right? And so the world then becomes drained of the sacred, and what the Judaic people are then are the people of the law, as Muhammad called them, the people of the book. They follow the book. What holds them together? The law. So how do you know that you are a member of the Jewish faith? Well, you follow the law, right? And so it's a group of people who do not bow down. They don't have the idolatry of the flesh. and honor and worship a man, right? So we know right now, I'm recording this just a few days before the 2020 election, and the idolatry of the man, Donald Trump, has been amazing to behold, right? That the followers of Donald Trump have been engaged in all manner of acting out in his name, honoring his name, his person, right? And that to the Calvinists would be idolatry of the flesh, right? Having someone who isn't the law, right? And who nevertheless is worshipped as almost a godlike figure. And then there's no idolatry of the flesh, and there's no idolatry of the sacred either, right? You're not sacrificing primarily or praying. You instead are following law. So it's a community bonded together by the obedience to law and by the ritual affirmation of the significance of the law, right? And so that, hence, I think that's what what accounts for the longevity and the incredible power of the Judaic culture, right? Okay, so Weber then claims that same argument that God is gone, God is not a God of sacrifice and magic, God is a God of law and language, follow that law, right? That becomes Calvin as well. Now, the essence of it is, it's multifold, but one of the big things is it makes the entire world a means to achieve an end. The end is the greater glory of God, which is operationalized in a practical way by the believer as success in a calling, working hard in a calling, and being frugal in your expenditures and being, avoiding sin. And so you're working hard in a calling, avoiding sin, reinvesting, and so on. And so then you've got this psychological drive to do well. So the world becomes a means instead of an end. And then the end is profit-seeking, or in the Protestant version, salvation, right? Measured by profit-seeking, and hence you get the psychological premium or sanction, depending upon the translation, to follow the law. Okay, so there we go. So, all right, I think that gets us inside of the Protestant ethic then. Okay. So, asceticism and the spirit of capitalism. Here, let's follow. I've got handwritten notes. I know they're hard to read, but let's just sort of follow these. So, asceticism and the spirit of capitalism. On page 155, Weber writes that English Puritanism was the most consistent working out of the Calvinist calling. So the Dutch, he said, were only strictly Calvinists for about 7 years, but the British took it seriously, at least factions within Britain did. They killed the king. You had the Civil War. Cromwell took over, right? And you had really a full generation that was strictly Calvinist. And the Calvinist movement had gone on quite before that. And then when Calvinism sort of comes to an end in Britain, there's a massive migration over to the New World. Put that another way. Prior to I don't think how that works. When Cromwell is defeated, there's this mass exodus of Puritans to the New World, to New England, and then you get the transfer of that fully consistent working out of the Calvinist calling. You get it transferred onto sort of the American setting. So David Hackett Fisher talks about that, following Weber, that what's important about America, it's a place that didn't have an existing culture that the English Puritans respected. Yes, there were Native Americans here, but they weren't respected. And they certainly were not viewed as people who were following God's command. And since the Puritans knew the one right way to live, they attempted to make the Native Americans follow it, even though they were probably damned, right? And so the New World provided this very, very open field where everything in the New World was a means to achieve the end of salvation, right? So the New World, New England, even more so than Old England, was a place where the Puritan logic could work itself out in great consistency. So again, he looks at Richard Baxter, the minister of Kidderminster, who on page 156 argues one of the most successful ministers known to history. He uses a couple of Baxter's writings. I've been reading Baxter about the last 4 years. Saints Everlasting Rest, Christian Directory. Yeah, the autobiography of Baxter is also really worth reading. And he uses those writings then, those sort of pastoral writings, to explain and understand the Puritan ethics as applied to everyday life. So to Weber, whatever the big religious beliefs are that theologians are fussing with, that doesn't matter much. What matters much more is the way that actual ministers on the ground translate big beliefs like predestination into practical ethics, economic ethics, right? So to him, the pastoral writings, right, the way that actual ministers on the ground helped sinners become good Calvinists, that's more important, okay? All right, then he compares that to like Spainer's writings on pietism or Barclay's writings on Quakerism, as well as other things. So you're getting a lot of comparative literary analysis in this chapter. Okay, page 156, he starts raising a bunch of issues that Puritans had to deal with, as well as anyone else who was dealing with economic ethics. Number one is the problem of wealth, right? And so he deals with wealth, and he says, the wealth is always considered a great danger, right? A great danger. Temptations of wealth never end, right? And so, that Calvin was, pro-wealth, but Calvinists became kind of anti-wealth. They started worrying about wealth. Calvin was much more pro-earthly goods than anything else. In fact, we get this notion that because wealth is such a danger, you have to constantly be using wealth ascetically by reinvesting wealth in more money making, in capital. So from Marx, we know that capital is dead labor that ensnares, harnesses, and rides the back of living labor. And that is the appropriate storage facility for wealth, is in capital, that dead labor riding others, instead of commodities that are consumed for like luxury consumption or something, right? So Catholicism was fine with wealth, but the Calvinists were they found it very problematic. And so here's what Weber says, is that the real moral objection to wealth is the relaxation in the security of possession and the enjoyment of wealth, with the consequence of idleness and temptations of the flesh, above all of distraction from the pursuit of a righteous life. So you're not going to be a hard-driven Puritan if you've got a big bank account, right? You're not going to be a hard-driven Puritan if you've got a trust fund. So you might just enjoy your wealth and be distracted. So to him, this is, to Baxter, this is the big problem with wealth, right? The saints' everlasting rest, as Baxter said, is in the next world. It's not in this world. So do not relax. Keep striving. So this is Baxter's argument, right? Is that you must avoid temptation, and that wealth always tempts us, right? So, exhortation to keep busy, business. Stay busy. Don't use your wealth. Don't live off of your wealth. So being wealthy isn't important as long as you stay busy and act as though you don't have it, right? Don't enjoy your wealth. You reinvest it. Not leisure and enjoyment, but only activity serves to increase the glory of God, right? Do the works of he who sent you as long as it is day, right? And then the second issue, the waste of time. The waste of time is the deadliest of sins, right? All waste of time in leisure or unproductive pursuits is condemned. Even prayer, right? Even contemplation and prayer. Even a religious holiday, except for the Sabbath, is sin, right? So time is spiritual money. It is less pleasing to God to do anything except perform His will in a calling, right? And then if you're not going to do that, if you're going to think about God, do it on Sunday, the day that's provided anyway. And then, prayer is a waste of time. You must stay busy in continuous bodily or mentally labor for two reasons. One, it's asceticism, that you should be ascetic because there is no mystical path to salvation. The only way you can defend against sin is to stay, as I wrote about Puritanism, about ascetic Protestantism, is that you must stay within your calling because your calling acts as a magic circle, keeping demons at bay. So you can defend against sin by staying in your calling. And then the second thing is that you are it's an improved ascetic technique, and Sexual asceticism is part of this. Sexual intercourse you have to have the sober procreation of children is allowed, as Baxter says. It's in the footnotes here. But what you should do every day is work hard in your calling, eat a moderate vegetable diet, cold baths, those kinds of things. The end of life, he who will not work shall not eat, those kinds of things. So hard work in your calling is the only rightful way of life. And medieval, that the medieval love for contemplation about God, thinking about God, being contemplative, joining a monastery, all gone. Instead, you have to duty to labor outside in your calling instead. Okay? So issue 2 was time on page 157, 158. Do not waste time. You must redeem time providentially, right? It's been provided for you to use. You must use it in a providential fashion in accordance with God's law. Issue 3 then was the issue of spontaneous enjoyment. We already talked about that. You cannot engage in spontaneous enjoyment. Both of those terms are problematic. But the notion of spontaneity is really important. To Weber, you must methodically and systematically work in a calling in order to be living out the ascetic Protestant call. So anything spontaneous, it means you get a whim and you follow a whim of thought, a whim of action, right? Anything spontaneous. So you must work in a calling systematically, methodically, right? Pursue it that way. Sex should only be for procreation, sober procreation. It should be planned. It should be ascetically pursued, methodical, that kind of thing. Work hard to get pregnant, and then cease the spontaneous enjoyment thereafter. No prayer, no contemplation, right? Page 160 is his discussion there of vocations and the calling. Again, it is God's will. God's will for each of us. The call is for us to work in this worldly position. And page 162, it's not just labor that is commanded by God, but it is rational labor in a calling. This is the top of page 162, right? Rational labor in a calling is what is demanded, right? So you can't just do avocations and that kind of stuff. So you are allowed to have multiple callings if it's for the common good, or if you can really enhance, if the one calling isn't keeping you busy and you have extra time to redeem, a second calling is okay, but it's problematic if it takes away from your first calling. And then you should always beware of changing callings. You should stick to your callings, as it's in Corinthians in the King James Bible. But you can change callings if you can find one that's more useful or something, right? Okay. And so how do you know that you're in the right calling? Because of it's helping the community, you're doing something useful, and it enhances your private profitableness, right? So it really is about you making out in the world in a profitable way. Okay, page 162, stick to your calling, grow rich, but do not enjoy your money. Page 164, he talks about legalism, sort of the Judaic legacy in Calvinism, and formality. So he says that, in many ways, the English Puritans were called English Hebraism. The Old Testament was favored over the New. Again, I think I mentioned in the last lecture, Jesus was not a Calvinist. So if only a Calvinist is Christian, Jesus was not a Christian, right? It's not a Bible-based movement at all. This is really about systematically devaluing the world and creating a world consistent with the providence of the law. Okay, so page 166. You should labor to be rich for God. That's on page 163. The ascetic importance of a fixed calling. Stay within your fixed calling. God blesses his trade. Stick to it. Bottom of the page. So page 166. Right here. So let us now try to clarify the points in which the Puritan calling and the idea of the calling and the psychological premium it placed upon ascetic conduct was bound directly to influence the development of capitalist way of life. As we have seen, asceticism turned with all its force against one thing, spontaneous enjoyment of life and all it had to offer. Okay? He talks about the Book of Sports, which was a list of sort of all of the amusements and recreations of merry old England, and that the Calvinists fought against those. Yeah, Brink. Yeah. So the feudal and monarchical forces protected pleasure seekers against the authoritarianism and middle class piety of Calvinists, right? Um, and let's go down here. Yeah. So ascetic conduct, as against this, merry old England, the Puritans upheld their decisive characteristic, the principle of ascetic conduct, right? For Quakerism, the Puritan aversion to sport, even for the Quakers. Sport was accepted only if it served a rational purpose. He mentions down here, I think gardening is one of the things that were allowed among the Quakers. You could garden for exercise. That was the sport that was allowed because it was needful and kind of useful and so on. But you are trying to avoid enjoyment. If you're getting spontaneous expression of undisciplined impulses, then it should be avoided, right? Because it's essentially idolatry. So raw instincts or the irrational gambling instinct have to be condemned. Impulsive enjoyment of life, which leads away from work in a calling and from religion, was as such the enemy of rational asceticism and must be condemned. Yeah. All right. So it's against all kinds of aesthetic culture. So again, he talks on page 168 of asceticism descended like a frost on the life of merry old England, right? And ferocious hatred of anything which smacked of superstition, of all survivals of magical or sacramental salvation applied to the Christian festivities in the Maypole. Some of the most strident, witchcraft trials and witch burnings occurred not just in Old England, but in New England. The famous killings in Salem, Massachusetts. Real hatred for this stuff, right? Weber, in the footnotes, he writes about Rembrandt, that most art was really, especially the beautiful art, of the Renaissance, the beautiful art of fleshiness and that kind of stuff. He thought that maybe Rembrandt, if you ever seen Rembrandt's self-portrait or the portraits he made of his wife or the drawing that he made of his mistress, very fleshy, ugly pictures, right? They're not idealized in any way. Sober, honest, that was a kind of Puritan way to do art, right? Not art for beauty's sake, but art that was honest, realistic, that kind of thing, right? That showed the ugliness of life as well as the beauty, warts and all, as they say, right? All right. Okay. The theater, they were against the theater because the theater, again, was so against artwork, against theater, against beautiful music, anything against idle talk. There's no literature or art, against any kind of superfluous partying and that kind of stuff. Any kind of vain ostentation, the idolatry of the flesh by dressing well or by trying to show off parts of your body, sexually enhance your body or something. So instead, clothing should have sober utility, right? In my course on social problems and American values, I talk about Quaker dress and Puritan dress. So Weber notes, I think in a footnote, that the Puritans' funny short haircuts became the normal bourgeois haircut by the 19th century. And so men's hairstyles haven't changed much in over 150 years, right? That the kind of short hair, instead of the flowing cavalier locks, right, became normalized. And then that male dress hasn't changed much in 150 years, right? If you look at portraits of men from around, say, 1920, if you look at portraits, say, of F. Scott Fitzgerald, the clothing he wore could be worn today, right, by men today without it causing any notice. So, I like Burberry coats, sort of the trench coat, uniform. So clothing should be a uniform kind of. So the uniformity of life, uniforms, really important. Standardization and so on. If you've ever seen the kind of khaki-colored clothing like a trench coat or khaki pants or something, that kind of, that's kind of a Quaker aesthetic here, right? That again, it's not beautiful, it's not ostentatious, it's similar for everyone, and so it's not. Here's Rembrandt again, maybe this kind of ugly. Prohibition against spending for enjoyment. So anything that you do engage in as an avocation had better not cost much, because you need to be reinvesting God's gold back into capitalism, right? Yeah, so this worldly Protestant asceticism, as we may recapitulate up to this point, acted powerfully against the spontaneous enjoyment of possessions, restricted consumption, especially of luxuries, psychological effect of freeing the acquisition of goods from the inhibitions of traditionalist ethics, right? And so so you're not spending your money as you would traditionally. The bonds of the impulse of acquisition looked not only legalized it, but the campaign against temptations of the flesh, dependence on external things, struggle against rational acquisition was not part of the ascetic way. Rational acquisition's fine. The big problem is the hedonistic use of wealth, or ostentatious release of wealth. So the acquisition of wealth is good. It's marked with the sacred pure, but the enjoyment of wealth is bad, right? It is definitely sin. So, avoiding idolatry of the flesh, avoiding mortification of the flesh, right? You should be comfortable, but not idolatrous by trying to wear luxury goods or those kinds of things. How do we do? So that's the summation. So you wind up with a kind of anti-aesthetic culture, no idolatry, dress is simple, durable uniforms, Rembrandt as an exemplar of the non-aesthetic art. Again, look up his self-portrait to see what I mean. Page 170, no spending upon the personal consumption. Should be frugal, right? Page 170 to 1 then is that summation we just read. Page 172, asceticism and industry and frugality. Okay, now we're getting to the three things. Yeah, here we are. Yeah, so here it is. So, all right. Asceticism looked upon the pursuit of wealth as an end in itself, as highly reprehensible. Yeah, but the attainment of it as a fruit of labor and a calling was a sign of God's blessing. So trying to get rich to be rich or to show off or something, bad, but doing it as a sign. So wealth had to be viewed as a sign system, as a symbol. Tangible wealth that was enjoyed, bad. Symbolic wealth that was not enjoyed but just indexed one's moral superiority is good. All right? And Weber, here it is then. The religious valuation of restless, continuous, systematic work in a worldly calling as the highest means to asceticism. And at the same time, the surest and most evident proof of rebirth and genuine faith must have been the most powerful, conceivable lever for the expansion of that attitude toward life, which we have here called the spirit of capitalism. Okay? So there it is. This is his argument. So this is on page 172. Okay? That breaking magic, breaking tradition, and then creating the psychological premium upon unceasing activity in pursuit of money making, and then never enjoying the money, because that would be sin and damnation, but instead throwing the money back into the market again, that was, again, the most powerful conceivable lever for the expansion of the attitude we'd call the spirit of capitalism. All right, so when the limitation of consumption is combined with this release of acquisitive activity, the inevitable practical result is obvious: accumulation of capital through ascetic consumption to save. So he writes about that. And so then you become, excellent capitalists. Yeah, so let's see here. The key passage on 172, which we've done. Then go to 175, key passage regarded wealth as symbolic sign, not tangible luxury to enjoy. So, here, we should read this. As far as the influence of the Puritan outlook extended under all circumstances, much more important than the mere encouragement of capital accumulation, it favored the development of a rational bourgeois economic life. It was the most important, above all, the only consistent influence in the development of that life. It stood at the cradle of the modern economic man. So again, really, this is page 174, really critical argument, recapitulation of the whole book. Puritanism, Calvinism, was the purest form of the generation of the capitalist subjectivity, right? He writes about the second generation never being as serious. And then the problem of monasteries. They always tended to accumulate wealth because people worked hard and didn't spend the money, so they got wealthy. So then what do you do with the wealth? Then the John Wesley quote is what's crucial here. I fear wherever riches have increased, the essence of religion has decreased in the same proportion. This is John Wesley, a founder of Methodism, a man who spent time at Herrnhut with Zinzendorf, the German pietist, and so on. Therefore, I do not see how it is possible in the nature of things for any revival of true religion to continue long. For religion must necessarily produce both industry and frugality. Industry and frugality. Industry and frugality. And these cannot but produce riches. But as riches increase, so will pride, anger, and love of the world in all of its branches. And then, how then is it possible that Methodism, which is the religion of the heart, is able to survive? The Methodists in every place grow diligent and frugal, and therefore they increase in goods, and they proportionately increase in pride and anger and the desire of the flesh, desire of the eyes, and the pride of life. So there it is. So there's a kind of self-negation, a contradiction built into Protestant asceticism, right? Like the Methodists, you are frugal and you work hard, and because you're frugal and you work hard, you get wealthy, and that wealth becomes a disincentive to be frugal and to work hard, right? And there it is. So we ought not to, the vanishing away happens. We ought not to prevent people from being diligent and frugal. We must exhort all Christians to gain all they can and to save all they can, in effect, to grow rich. However, again, try to find a way to not allow those riches to be enjoyed. Yeah. The intensity of the search for the kingdom of God commenced gradually to pass over into sober economic virtue. The religious roots died out slowly, giving way to utilitarian worldliness. So on page 175. So this is the story now, is that over and over again, the Protestant ascetics get rich, and once rich, they lose the religious foundation, right? All right. So a specifically bourgeois economic ethic had grown up with the conscientiousness of standing in the fullness of God's grace and being visibly blessed by him. The bourgeois businessman, again, sexist, sorry, but as long as he remained within the bounds of formal correctness, again, kind of ritual purity, as long as his moral conduct was spotless and the use to which he put his wealth was not objectionable, could follow his pecuniary interests as he would and feel that he was fulfilling a duty in doing so. The power of religious asceticism provided him, in addition, with sober conscientiousness and unusually industrious workmen. This is really important. So it isn't just a capitalist, but it's the proletariat that gets reconstructed by the Protestant ethic. This is Weber's point about Richard Baxter. Richard Baxter was really successful not in creating capitalists, but in creating a proletariat that was willing to work hard as though they were capitalists, right? A Protestant ascetic proletariat, okay? So the Protestant ethic then, industry, diligence, and frugality of the capitalist, and then the industrial worker who works hard as a laborer, as though the labor itself was a calling, right? And then it gave him, either the worker or the capitalist, a comforting assurance that the unequal distribution of goods of this world was a special dispensation of divine providence. And the differences of social class, as in particular grace, pursued secret ends unknown to men. So you don't resist, again, social class. You just sort of see it as a working out of providence. Again, so there's a dying out of the religious root, page 177, as capitalism advances. We go on to the next page. It talks about, about charisma. Let's leave that behind. So there's a psychological premium. Hard work is as a loyal sub. Yeah, so working hard, here it is, the psychological sanction of it through the conception of this labor as a calling. Again, so even the proletariat views work as a calling. Often in the last analysis, the only means of attaining certainty of grace. On the other hand, it legalized the exploitation of this specific willingness to work, and that it is also interpreted. It also interpreted the employer's business activity as a calling. So it's the kingdom of God only through the fulfillment of duty and the calling and the strict asceticism, church discipline naturally imposed, especially on the propertyless classes, was bound to affect the productivity of labor in the capitalist sense of the world. So again, page 179, not just capitalist businessmen, again, they're profit maximizers and acquisition as a calling, but even the laborer, the proletariat working for a wage, approaches work as a calling, right? The treatment of labor as a calling, labor in the proletariat sense, became, They believe that labor and industry is their duty towards God, whether you're upper class, middle class, whether you're middle class or working class, right? Okay, so how are we doing here? Page 174, then, again, to re-summarize the secularization of the Protestant ethic into the spirit of capitalism. Well, that's his basic argument. What is the spirit of capitalism? The Protestant ethic without religion, right? It's secularized. Once you've killed off the sacred, you lose even the sacredness of the pursuit of profit, at least a religious framing of it. And you simply have the spirit of capitalism, as you did in Franklin, where the pursuit of profit as an end in itself no longer required religious justification. Franklin didn't talk about God as the person commanding him to work hard. He simply worked hard. He no longer talked about God as the person who rewarded him for getting a high profit. He merely worked hard to get a high profit. Remember, in Franklin, you're not working hard to make money to enjoy it. You're working hard to make money as an end in itself. So you're treating profit as a sacred end, even though it's drained of religious significance, okay? So page 176 to 7, we've already looked at that, the summation. So again, businessmen make profit their sacred end. Working men make ascetic labor and a calling their sacred end, right? Just staying busy, working hard, even if you're not getting rich. That is what the proletariat does. So page 180 to 181 are two of my favorite pages in all of sociology. Of the fundamental elements of the spirit of modern capitalism and modern culture, the rational conduct on the basis of the idea of the calling was born, right? So this is crucial. Rational conduct, the complete unconstrained selection of means to pursue an end, the devaluation of the entire world, of other human beings, of one's own life, of one's own time, of one's own family, of one's own marriage, whatever, devaluing everything into a means to achieve the end of profit, right? That became the center of the Protestant ethic, right? And the idea of the calling, then, is everything. The spirit of Christian asceticism. One is only to reread the passage from Franklin in chapter 2, quote at the beginning of this essay, in order to see that the essential elements of the attitude were there, which were there called the spirit of capitalism, right, are the same as that we've just shown to be the content of the Puritan worldly asceticism. Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism are the same. Spirit of capitalism lacks God. Protestantism had it, right? Without the religious basis, which by Franklin's time had died away, right? So there it is. Modern labor has an ascetic character, all right? Specialized work is necessary. You must renounce everything except specialized work and a calling. This way, you have an inner belief that pursuing these ends is correct. So there you are. The Puritan wanted to work in a calling. We, those who are alive in 1920 or 1905, us, are forced to do so. So the Puritan pursued this out of an inner conviction that this is the right thing to do with one's life. We don't have a choice. We're forced to do it. For when asceticism was carried out of monastic cells into everyday life and began to dominate worldly morality, as it did in part in building the tremendous cosmos of the modern economic order, the order now became technical and economic, machine production, and it is. So the way I always tell my students that the Protestant ethic was initially carried inside as a spirit, and now it's become an exoskeleton. So let's get on to this next section. So now our lives are determined by the machine production, technical and industrial and economic path that has been established by capitalists, right? If you're born into the mechanism of capitalism, even if you're not directly concerned with economic acquisition, you must follow this ascetic way, labor ascetically as a way of life with irresistible force. Perhaps it will so determine them, the lives of all individuals, until the last ton of fossilized coal is burnt. One of my favorite lines, right? So capitalism is literally in the saddle and is riding human beings and will continue to do so until the last ton of coal is burned. In Baxter's view, the care for external goods should only lie on the shoulders of the saint, like a light cloak, because remember, you shouldn't care about it. You're not there to enjoy it. You're only there to index your salvation, right? So you shouldn't really care about the external goods. They're there as an index, right? So in Baxter's view, the care for external goods should only lie on the shoulders of the saint, like a light cloak, which can be thrown aside at any moment, right? But fate decreed that the cloak of ascetic industry, right, should become an iron cage. And there's some controversy about that. Later translators of the book claim that iron cage, which is a direct reference, by the way, to Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and it's one of the characters is the man in the iron cage. But steel hard casing, like a bullet that's cased, or like steel hard casing, like I always think about like conduit, electrical conduit where wires are put into steel hard casing to ensure that nothing rots them or gets to them and makes them eternal, right? That's what he's getting at here. Fate decreed that instead of being in a cloak, having a cloak we can cast aside, we're encased in steel, right? And we have an exoskeleton around us, and we're locked into ascetic work in a calling, whether we want to be or not. All right, and there he goes. So the spirit of religious asceticism has escaped the iron cage, and what we're left with then is simply calling as deadened belief that still operates in the world, right? The rosy blush of its laughing air, the enlightenment, is irretrievably fading. The idea of duty and one's calling prowls about in our lives like the ghost of all dead religious beliefs, right? So again, who are we now? We are specialists without spirit, sensualists without heart. This nullity imagines that it has attained a level of civilization never before achieved. So we are a nullity. So there it is. So we live in a world of ascetic rationalism in Wolff's technical sense. Yeah, and the ongoing rise of rationalization and in the spirit of capitalism. Yeah, so I'd sort of leave that behind. I don't even know what I want to say with that. So there we are. So, so that's the end of it. Yeah, so ascetic secular rationalism, that's what we're living in, right? Okay. So I think we've hit most of it. So let's sort of use this to summarize if we can, okay? All right, so I've got here the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So Weber outlined 7 different spirits. The spirit of traditionalism, the spirit of non-ascetic Protestantism. So spirit of traditionalism is also Catholicism. Spirit of non-ascetic Protestantism, the archetype is Lutheranism. Spirit of pietism or Quakerism, the spirit of Methodism, the spirit of Anabaptism, the spirit of Calvinism, and the spirit of capitalism. And then he has all of these dimensions. So again, it's probably difficult to read, but we'll just try to go through. So the mundane God, the immanent God, right, that can be approached with mysticism and magic and sacrifice and so on. I think that these overlap completely, yeah. So the spirit of traditionalism, Catholicism, Lutheranism, pietism and Quakerism, Methodism and Anabaptism all still maintain some remnant at least of a mundane God and some kind of mysticism and magic, okay? All right. The supramundane God only is the one God in the spirit of Calvinism and in capitalism. And in capitalism, there's no God at all. But as we've found out, in the spirit of Calvinism, God's gone anyway, killed off all the other gods, and then turned his back and left, right? Okay, so there is no God. Mysticism and magic occurs everywhere that there's a mundane God, but asceticism, as Weber writes in chapter 4, isn't just associated with Calvinism and the spirit of capitalism, but it's also associated with 3 other variants of what he calls ascetic Protestantism. So pietism, Quakerism, Methodism, and Anabaptism are 3 ascetic Protestantisms that still maintain mysticism and magic, but nevertheless drive people into a calling, of this worldly calling. So down here, the calling we see emerged not only it emerges in Luther, but it's not fully rational. So this doesn't quite count. Yes, we have this worldly callings, but they're not fully systematic and rational. You still work to live. In these, you're living to work. So pietism, Methodism, Anabaptism, Calvinism, and the spirit of capitalism, you all have the calling in the sense of rational ascetic conduct, where you live to work. That work becomes all of life. Okay? Enjoy community. Well, you enjoy community in traditional society. Community is a valued end of life, values. And in non-ascetic Protestantism, and then oddly enough in pietism and Quakerism, where the community becomes something that you love and care about, right? So I wonder if I have a pic. Yeah, so here's like Quakers, Shakers, the double distilled Quakers, dancing away in their community, right? Because community is something that you highly value. But in the other variants, community isn't important, right? Becoming perfect is important to the Methodists. So there's a belief in perfectionism. Fear worldly sin. That's the dominant theme of Anabaptism, right? You're fearing worldly sin. So, like Jacob Menno, you're becoming who created the Mennonites. You're withdrawing together into a community away from the worldly, from the English, as they're called, right? All right. Profit is your goal. Well, it's not your full goal in traditional Catholicism or in Lutheranism, but it is an important goal and an index of something in some moral order in Pietism, in Methodism, in Anabaptism. And again, it's kind of a mix in Calvinism. It is your absolute goal, but it's merely an index of salvation. And how do you know you're saved? It's because you're working for the greater glory of God, right? And so what you really care about is salvation, not money making, but money making is an index. In the spirit of capitalism, you don't care about salvation, you're just in it for money making. Spontaneous joy. Well, a lot of spontaneous joy in Catholicism, Lutheranism, and oddly enough in Pietism and Quakerism. A lot of joy, as we saw the little dancers there a moment ago, but not so much in Methodism, Anabaptism, and Calvinism, as well as in the spirit of capitalism. In later capitalism, you can have spontaneous joy in the realm of consumption, especially after, say, the 20s or so, as consumer capitalism takes off. But in Weber's world, it's not really a mix. You just don't enjoy, you just work hard. Okay. Sex, art, poetry, all good in Catholicism, Lutheranism, and Pietist Quakerism, and sort of bad everywhere else. And again, it's mixed now because we get consumer capitalism coming later. But in the pure spirit of capitalism, you avoid all of that. Poor, are the poor good or bad? They're good and should be loved and cared for in those first three. Again, traditionalism, Lutheranism, and Pietism, and bad in the others. They should be made to work and so on. Should one work to live or live to work? Well, you should work to live in the first three. So again, traditionalism, Lutheranism, Pietism, and then you should live to work. Well, that's also true to a degree of Pietism, but it's absolutely true of the others. Okay, so this is the spirit of capitalism, and this is the traditional economic ethic, right? Okay, so there's a sort of comparison and contrast of these different ways. Now, in my own work, I parse Weber a little differently, and I combine Weber with Durkheim and Marx. But at any rate, this is sort of the way I parse it in my work on economic theology, is that I tend to view Catholicism and Anglicanism as that traditional way. We rarely get to a full deist, non-religious spirit of capitalism. It rarely lives in a fully disenchanted world. You have Calvinism and Pietism as alternative ways. But generally, as soon as you get to a fully secular world, you get these religious awakenings, and a free grace evangelism emerges. And so often, and this is sort of what I write about, I had it in the back of the book there as my last point, is that in my own work, I view the reignition of the sacred, reignition of theology, the reignition of different religiously tinged ways of life as an ideological mechanism to keep capitalism going. So accumulation is maintained, as Marx would say. Religion's an opiate. It's also an ideology, and that's something Weber isn't directly dealing with. So to Weber, again, just to sort of use our image, what does his book say? His book tells us that the Protestant ethic, as carried by Calvin, led to the spirit of capitalism because it removed sacredness from the world. All magic and all sacredness gone. The world became a means to an end, and the end was profit. For the actual technical Calvinists, you're trying to prove salvation by reconstructing the world, working for the greater glory of God. That only lasts a generation or two. The way that they knew that they were doing that was success in their calling as measured by profit. And in the spirit of capitalism, you lose the transcendent God is gone, and there is no God. You simply pursue wealth as an end in itself. So the entire world, the people within it, your children, everything are a means to an end instead of an end in itself. I'll end with one image here, and that is that, if I can lay my hands on it, which I never seem to be able to do, I wanted to end with this image so that's the image from Bunyan's illustrations to, William Blake's illustrations to John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. So this is Pilgrim fleeing the city of destruction. This is his family and friends calling for him, don't go, don't go. But salvation matters more. He's got the bundle of sins on his back that he wants to get rid of. Don't go, don't go. So your family, your friends, your children, as Weber describes, the wife is dragging by the feet, right? And you go on anyway. The modern person does that, right? You transform your life into a pilgrimage, right? A journey that you pursue for your own ends. Again, with your hand in the Bible, which isn't giving you stories, it's giving you instead the way, right? The way of Calvin or Yahweh, anyway. And so you're leaving everyone else behind. So to Weber, that's the story. Calvinism and Protestant Christianity, in that sense, the ascetics destroy all sacredness in the world. The world becomes devoid of everything. It becomes disenchanted. It's a mere means to an end. It's meat and human energy that can be deployed to make profit. Okay? So that's the story. With that, we'll end. I hope you found this useful.